My brothers and sisters, gather close this day. Let us cast our eyes upon a scene the world was designed to applaud, a headline spun in gold and preached from pulpits of power. The news spread like a sweet rumor on a Sunday morning. The International Monetary Fund, the mighty IMF, has erased billions of dollars in African debt. They called it relief. They called it a gift. A second chance, wrapped in a shimmering bow of diplomacy. The cameras smiled. The anchors, dressed in their finest, spoke of opportunity and a new partnership. But I want you to remember this truth, a truth carved into the history of our people. When they offer the gift, you must always look for the chain. In Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, a young soldier leader named Captain Ibrahim Traore heard the applause. But he did not smile. He did not rush to the signing table. Instead, he leaned into the whisper of his own spirit, and the spirit told him, behind their smiles, there is always a trap. He saw not a gift of freedom, but a blueprint for a new form of servitude. For decades, we've witnessed this cycle: the handshake, the promise, the paper that binds the soul of a nation. Is it not high time, children of God, that we stop trading the future of our grandchildren for a temporary respite? Is it not time we learn to read the fine print that whispers of repossession and perpetual extraction? This is not just a story about African sovereignty. This is a reckoning for all who value African dignity. If this truth stirs the memory of your own struggles, if you believe that freedom is not granted but claimed, then lift your hand and subscribe to this channel right now. Share this message widely and let the world know the price of the so-called mercy. Hear the word of the Lord, my family, and understand the deep history that binds us. They came to the table offering a gift, but they forget that in the history of the black man's dealing with the West, the gift is often just the beautiful wrapper on a theft. $3 billion, a number so vast it was designed to make the leaders' heads swim with relief. They told our nations, sign here, and the chains of yesterday shall be broken. And many nations, weary and burdened, rushed forward, eager for the cancellation, longing for the promise of a clean slate. But I tell you, a true Christian must possess a spirit of discernment. And Captain Ibrahim Traore, the young soldier and leader of Burkina Faso, possessed that spirit in abundance. He had the memory of his ancestors running through his veins, the memory of countless treaties, paper agreements, and handshakes that always ended with European pockets full and African treasuries empty. He remembered the old structural adjustment programs of the 1980s, when the IMF and the World Bank, same faces, different suits, came bearing loans that demanded austerity, demanding that we sell the family silver, demanding that we cut the health budget for the sick and the education budget for the children, all in the name of market efficiency. And so, as the world celebrated, the leader leaned into the document. He did not ask what was removed, he asked what was required. He did not look at the headline of relief, he looked at the fine print of the contract. And what did the fine print whisper, my friends? It whispered of collateral. It spoke not of money, but of things far more precious than mere dollars and cents. It spoke of gold bars deep within the earth. It spoke of oil wells beneath the waves. It spoke of uranium, the very energy of the atom, the lifeblood of Europe's power stations. Phrases like commodity secured and resource backed were sprinkled throughout the document like dust, designed to look like harmless financial jargon. But Traoré knew that these were not technical terms. They were a coded language for repossession. What is debt relief if the price of that relief is the permanent mortgage of your nation's soul? Look at the brutal mathematics of this betrayal. One country, dazzled by the quick cancellation, signed away nearly 40% of its offshore oil revenues for a decade. Another country mortgaged over 25 tons of its gold reserves, a value of over $1.8 billion US, just to receive a clean balance sheet. They were trading hard, physical, non-renewable assets for a temporary line item on a ledger. My brothers and sisters, this is a tale older than any of us. It is the new iteration of the 40 pieces of silver. Our ancestors were taken from their homeland, treated as chattel, property, in exchange for mere trinkets and paper agreements. Now they are not taking the body, they are taking the ground beneath the body. They are not taking the hands that toil, they are taking the fruit of the toil for generations to come. And Captain Ibrahim Traore saw the historical pattern, the ghost of colonialism walking in the polished shoes of international finance. He refused to join the applause. He refused to sign the lifeblood of his people away for a moment of quiet. He looked at the IMF, those merchants of debt and austerity, and asked the unanswerable question. When your ground holds over $40 billion in gold, and the uranium that lights up their cities, could any gift from them ever be free? This was not paranoia. It was memory. It was the clarity that comes from understanding that the old empires only changed their clothes. The signature had replaced the soldier, but the outcome was identical: extraction. The leader's refusal was a solitary act of courage, a prayer in the wilderness. But now, the question that hung in the air of Ouagadougou must hang in your heart. If this relief was so generous, if this debt was truly wiped clean, then what dark secret, what hidden agenda was contained within the fine print that made President Traoré say, "No, not today, not ever"? And what if the price of this debt relief was not just the resources of Burkina Faso, but the very foundation of a new global financial empire being constructed in Washington, using African wealth as its cornerstone? Hark, my congregation! You heard the initial warning. The gold was the collateral, the uranium was the payment. But what Captain Traoré and his inner circle of dedicated, righteous auditors were about to uncover was a plot far larger than mere debt collection. This was not about recovering $3 billion. This was about building a $500 billion empire upon the backs of the African people, and using our soil as the foundation. The leader, knowing the danger of open scrutiny, formed a secret financial investigation unit, an elite team of economists, analysts, and truth seekers. They pored over documents, not just from the IMF, but shadowy consultancy invoices, complex bank transfers routed through Luxembourg and Geneva, and offshore shell companies whose only purpose was to siphon aid money meant for schools and clinics. What did they find? They found a system rigged like a fixed game of dice. Clauses hidden deep within the agreements ensured that if the price of gold rose, the debt stabilization fees rose as well. If the price of oil fell, the repayment periods stretched out, forcing nations to mortgage yet another decade of production. Heads, the creditors won. Tails, Africa lost. Can you call that fairness? No, I call it financial colonization with a new suit and a fresh haircut. Then came the chilling, undeniable breakthrough. It was a leaked dossier, a secret plan, stamped with the name of advisors surrounding the former American president, Donald Trump. That dossier was called the Phoenix Dollar Commodity Stabilization Program. Phoenix, the bird that rises from the ashes. But whose ashes, I ask you? The ashes of African sovereignty. This Phoenix dollar was a grand vision in Washington, a new digital dollar designed to serve as a counterweight, a financial weapon, against the fast-rising power of the Chinese digital yuan. They needed a backbone for this new currency, a foundation that could be trusted worldwide. And what did they choose? Not American innovation, not Silicon Valley genius. They chose Africa's mineral wealth. The documents laid out the scheme with cold, brutal clarity. Projections outlined how just 5 African nations, including the gold and uranium resources of the Sahel, could underpin $500 billion worth of digital currency issuance. Think about that, my beloved. Our resources, the very wealth that belongs to the farmers, the teachers, the traders of our lands, was earmarked as the strategic collateral for someone else's empire, a global financial war fought between Washington and Beijing. Burkina Faso's uranium alone, valued at over $2.7 billion in US markets, was penciled in as a strategic stabilizer. Gold reserves across the Sahel, nearly 600 metric tons, assets worth over $40 billion, were quietly drafted into America's blueprint for digital hegemony. This was the truth that turned a debt problem into a declaration of war. The captain's suspicion was vindicated. The debt relief was never about Africa's dignity. It was about securing the raw material for financial dominance. Our nations were to be treated once again as mere collateral, a pawn on the global chessboard. Can we, who carry the heavy history of the transatlantic slave trade, afford to let our soil become the battlefield of giants once more? Can we allow our gold to be mined, not to fund our own destiny, but to serve as the foundation of a currency designed to control the world? This revelation did not just bring alarm. It brought a righteous burning anger to the hearts of President Traoré and his team. They knew that silence was no longer an option. The stakes were too high, the betrayal too profound. But how could a single landlocked nation, led by a young soldier, possibly stand up against the combined might of the IMF, the White House, and the entirety of Western financial power without bringing total destruction upon itself? That answer lay not in military might, but in the raw, unadulterated power of the truth. My beloved, we have reached the moment of decision, the day when the darkness of secrecy was confronted by the searing light of truth. Captain Traoré, the soldier who would not yield, understood one fundamental principle that the empires have always tried to conceal. The strongest weapon in politics is not the tank, it is not the soldier, but the raw power of transparency. After months spent in the shadows, combing through bank ledgers, and dissecting the legal jargon designed to confuse, the leader chose the path most feared by the manipulators. Not quiet diplomacy, not a secret bargaining session in Geneva, but full disclosure. He decided to put the chilling evidence directly into the hands of the people whose future was being mortgaged. Picture the scene, brothers and sisters, in a packed hall in Ouagadougou. The cameras are rolling, the microphones are trembling, and President Traoré steps to the podium. His voice is not a whisper of fear, it is the trumpet of conviction. With steady hands, he did not just read a speech. He unfolded the contracts themselves, page by damning page, laying bare every clause, every hidden fee, every calculated trap. Then came the final blow, the evidence that could not be denied. He held aloft the leaked dossier, the one stamped with the names of Donald Trump's advisors, the blueprint for the Phoenix dollar. His declaration cut sharper than any sword. This is not debt relief, he stated firmly. This is theft disguised as generosity. They seek our gold, our oil, our uranium, not to erase our burdens, but to mint their own digital empire. And the word went forth. Across Burkina Faso, across the Sahel, the truth spread like a glorious wildfire. Farmers in remote villages, teachers in classrooms, traders in the Grand Marché. They watched the subtitled broadcasts. They saw the numbers for themselves. Gold valued in New York at $2,450 an ounce was to be delivered by African nations at barely $1,650. Barrels of oil, selling globally at $75, were mortgaged away at just $50. What man, woman, or child, hearing those figures, could mistake relief for anything other than exploitation? The shock transformed instantly into righteous fury. On social media platforms across the continent, the hashtags ignited. Not relief, but robbery. Phoenix dollar trap. The truth, once confined to legal documents, was remixed into songs, shared in WhatsApp groups, and explained in simple graphics. President Traoré had weaponized the data, transforming complex financial terms into a language of liberation that every citizen could understand. This was not mere political theater. This was a calculated act of nation-building. By putting the evidence into the hands of the people, the captain shifted the balance of power. No longer could his warnings be dismissed as conspiracy. The numbers spoke louder than any foreign press release. The people themselves became the ultimate auditors, the collective shield against imperialism. And then the streets erupted. In Ouagadougou, thousands gathered with placards proclaiming, "Our resources are not for sale." In Bamako, in Niamey, students marched, chanting that Africa's sovereignty was worth more than any erased debt. Even in cities far to the south, protest banners appeared outside the very financial institutions, accused of brokering these wicked deals. What began as one leader's revelation had become a continental chorus of defiance. My question to you, my family, is this. When the people rise with the evidence in hand, when the numbers prove the betrayal beyond doubt, can the architects of the debt trap still control the narrative? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. The West tried to dismiss this as mere propaganda. But when market analysts in New York warn that a speech in a small, landlocked country could destabilize hundreds of billions of dollars in global funds, does that not mean that the young soldier's voice was, in fact, the one true sound of power? The truth, my dear ones, is a powerful fire, and when it burns, the masters of the lie must run for cover. As the shockwave of President Traoré's revelation hit the global news desks, the backlash was not just immediate, it was fierce and coordinated. The IMF, caught with the evidence of its deception circulating on millions of phones, issued denials. Press statements poured out of Washington, London, and Brussels, insisting the contracts were merely misinterpreted, that there was no collateral demanded. But how can a carefully crafted press release undo what a citizen has read with his own eyes? They tried to replace the truth with chatter, but the numbers, my family, had already done their work. Then came the voice of President Donald Trump himself. He dismissed the leader as a radical soldier out of his depth, accusing him of sabotaging opportunities. The Western media followed the script, painting the captain as reckless, a naive populist, or a dangerous threat to economic stability. They tried to smear the man because they could not deny the evidence. They sought to tarnish his name, hoping to erase the power of the documents he held. But the campaign of delegitimization did not weaken him. It only served to ignite the spirit of African dignity across the continent. Every insult, every threat of sanctions, every calculated dismissal by a Western commentator was interpreted by the people as confirmation of their own righteous stance. When the empire screams, it is proof that the ground is shifting beneath its feet. And the markets felt the tremor. Oh, how the markets trembled. Analysts in New York, those high priests of finance, tracked commodity futures with palpable fear. Gold prices spiked to $2,600 per ounce as investors worried that African suppliers would restrict exports. Uranium contracts, essential for Europe's nuclear reactors, surged 18% in a single week. Suddenly, the resources that were meant to be silent collateral had become a weapon of leverage. Could a speech in a small, landlocked country truly rattle the pillars of Wall Street? Yes, my friends, when the truth is armed with collective conviction, it absolutely can. In the face of these threats and slanders, the nations of the Sahel did not scatter. No, they tightened their ranks. The Alliance of Sahel States, AES, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger stood shoulder to shoulder. Joint communiques condemned the IMF contracts and pledged to defend one another against any financial retaliation. They knew that one nation alone could be punished, but a collective bloc, rich in gold, oil, and uranium, could not be ignored. The message was clear. They were tired of exchanging sovereignty for crumbs. They were tired of being treated as collateral. This moment, this stand, was not about money. It was about the intrinsic value of African dignity, a value that cannot be quantified by any dollar and cannot be bought by any gift. So, the threats were loud, the markets were panicked, and the continent was united. But what would be the final, ultimate act of defiance that would force the mighty IMF and the digital architects of the Phoenix dollar to finally retreat, proving once and for all that the age of financial empires was coming to an end? And so, my brothers and sisters, we arrive at the mountaintop, the culmination of courage, the point where resistance turned into reversal. The architects of global finance watched in disbelief as their meticulously laid plans began to unravel. The silence and the defiance of the people had achieved what armies could not. The climax arrived in Bamako, Mali, at an extraordinary summit. Under the gaze of the world, Captain Traoré's voice rang out, carrying the weight not just of Burkina Faso, but of an entire continent newly awakened. Alone they can sanction us, he declared, but united they cannot break us. This was not a meeting. It was a declaration of self-respect. The Sahel Alliance, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger took the decisive step. They announced the suspension, and in some cases, the outright cancellation of the resource-backed IMF contracts. Each cancellation was a domino falling, a piece of the Phoenix Dollar Foundation crumbling. What was once trumpeted as a $3 billion victory for international cooperation was now collapsing like a house built on sand. The irony, my family, is rich. The very resources, the gold, the oil, the uranium that were meant to be the unshakable foundation of the new digital dollar, became the tool of its destruction. When Africa said no, when our nations stood as a bloc, Washington and Brussels could no longer dictate the terms. The debt trap had been exposed, and the debtors, for once, held the true power. Financial analysts in New York began to use a word rarely associated with the continent: precedent. For the first time in decades, a coordinated refusal by African states had forced the mighty IMF into retreat. The Phoenix dollar, meant to be a symbol of American resilience, became instead a symbol of American overreach. Its name, meant to evoke rebirth, now stood for collapse. This confrontation proved that the age of unchallenged financial empires is indeed ending. Africa had not merely resisted the trap, it had flipped the entire game board. But the true victory, I tell you, is not measured in dollars saved or contracts shredded. The victory is the quiet resilience etched into the heart of the people who chose dignity over dependency. Burkina Faso may still face hardship, its citizens may still toil, but in that very struggle lies the triumph. For they stood before the world and said with unwavering clarity, "We will not mortgage our gold, our oil, our uranium to buy a temporary illusion of relief." True sovereignty, my beloved, is not measured by the size of loans forgiven. It is measured by the courage to refuse when refusal is just. The trap has been exposed, the chains have been rejected, and the continent is united. But now, as the dust settles, what does the future truly look like when Africa begins to write its own economic contract? And who will they turn to when the West has broken its trust beyond repair? So we stand at the close of this great narrative, my beloved family. What is the final sermon we must carry from Ouagadougou and Bamako? It is this: the story of Captain Ibrahim Traore is not merely a political scandal. It is a profound lesson in economic liberation. They tried to sell us an illusion that freedom could be bought with a piece of paper, that sovereignty was a negotiation, and that the only solution to the centuries-old plunder was to accept a modern-day debt trap dressed in diplomatic language. But the leader showed us that the greatest resource Africa possesses is not beneath the ground. It is the unbreakable spirit and collective will of its people. The gold remains where it belongs, in the hands of the nation. The uranium stays to power Africa's own future. This act of refusal, this choice of African dignity over temporary comfort, is a greater triumph than any check signed in Washington or Brussels. It is the beginning of a world where Africa writes its own contracts and dictates its own terms. The future is one where African dignity is non-negotiable. It is a future of self-determination, built on the solid foundation of truth and unity, where our resources fund our children's schools, our roads, and our hospitals, not someone else's digital empire. And now, the question turns to you, my dear viewers, my extended family here in America, who know the sting of contracts and the fight for fairness. You who have lived through the history of inequality. What is the price of your own dignity? What chains, disguised as relief or opportunity, are you being asked to accept in your own life, your own community? Do not let the truth you heard today just be noise. Save this video, share this message widely, and let every person you know understand that the refusal to mortgage your future is the greatest act of power. If you believe that the age of financial empires is truly ending, and that a new day is dawning for our mother continent, please hit the like button, subscribe right now, and tell me in the comments below, what action will you take today to reclaim your sovereignty? We do not ask permission to be free. We stand as one, and in that unity, we have already won.